Welcome to the Fall Home Gardener video series sponsored by the Sacramento Stormwater Quality Partnership. In this video, we will review the important role of beneficial plants as habitat for attracting all sorts of beneficial insects to naturally tend our gardens. And I like to say, plant them and they will come, and I'll give you some examples of that. My name is Sarah Sutton. I'm a landscape architect. I am a California native and a Bay Area native, have practiced most of my career in the area, and just I really am enjoying getting to know all the native plants and the benefits that they bring to our garden. We need to create gardens and landscapes as rich ecosystems that attract beneficials and naturally repel insects. Pest insects, by the way, and naturally repelling insect pests, we will reduce or ideally eliminate the need to apply pesticides that can run off into our watersheds with devastating effects downstream. And we say a lot more about that in the presentation on beneficial insects as a part of this series. So I encourage you to watch that if you haven't already. And by doing so, we also create a more resilient landscape that's alive and functioning completely as an ecosystem and can adapt to different environmental stresses over time. And a really good example is at this garden I visited not too long ago. The Google Mountain View headquarters has this big, beautiful courtyard garden, places to eat, space for the staff, but also the public's allowed to come stroll through. I usually go on a weekend. And by the way, if you do go, the guard may come over and you just have to tell them who you are and why you're there. And they say, okay, fine. What was great about this is it was so full of beneficial plants, a variety. Not all were natives, most of them were, but a lot of them were just beautiful and complemented the landscape. And it was full of butterflies, full of all sorts of flying insects and birds. It was a joy to be there with all that life instead of just a sterile landscape. So in this presentation, we will be discussing native plants and why it's critical to include them in our garden, why we need to focus on natives versus non-natives, and how to choose and source those native plants. I have a few plant lists I'll share, and then I'll also provide some design and maintenance tips. If you're just getting started, that might be helpful. And I will make one comment about native plants. We have so many plants that will thrive in our gardens in our California Mediterranean climate. And if you have favorites, or even you have a favorite that you want to put next to the front door, that's a plant that needs a lot more water than the rest of your garden, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we, over the decades, steered so far away from native plants that we need to bring them back as often as we can and wherever we can. And that leads into what I call the native imperative, and that we must emphasize not only natives, but local natives to your region and our landscapes. And as I said in the last slide, it doesn't mean every plant needs to be from that specific list. And I'll show you some lists that you can start to build your palette from. Native pollinators and caterpillar larvae support the entire food web, and especially birds. Birds need protein when they're rearing their young, during the mating season, and they like caterpillars. So I have some research that I'll share with you on that. All these larvae and pollinators have co-evolved with the local native plants, and they actually need them to survive. And so the monarch butterfly lives on the milkweed. It's one plant that can allow it to lay its eggs and rear the caterpillars, or let them rear themselves, and evolve into more monarch butterflies. And without local insects to pollinate our flowering plants, most flowering plants throughout our region and globally would go extinct over time. It would be a losing battle. If no one's pollinating the plants, eventually they'll lose their ability to reproduce themselves. So that would cause the entire food web to collapse and putting humans in peril. And there are articles about this that are a little scary, to say the least. But the good news is it's not too late. We can bring plants in and we can make a difference. And there is a term, keystone plants, that have been researched that they're the most important plants. And if you think of the keystone of the Roman arch, and there's the stone on the top that keeps it from collapsing, that's the idea of a keystone plant. There's certain ones that have so many benefits that they really help bolster the ecosystem, while other plants are being added and included in the region. And I encourage you to look at the video down below, which talks about this at length, a very compelling and very informative presentation that also ends with, here's what you do about it. And that's why I'm bringing this information to the public, is I want to make sure everybody knows about this. So natives and habitat, a little bit more about butterflies and moths. Professor Douglas Talani is an entomologist at the University of Delaware, and I saw him over 10 years ago at a conference present this information, and he continues to do more research and shares more of what he's found. And he had his graduate students help him research what plants, each species that he could identify of Lepidopteras, which are butterflies and moths, how many species could each native plant support? And meaning, how resilient a landscape would it be? And how many would it attract? So the oak is near the top at 270 species, which is mind-boggling. 270 different moths and butterflies possibly could stay there. And they don't all come at once. They come from different regions, but if they're scattered throughout your landscape and throughout your region and all of these other trees, they will help link these habitats together for the butterflies and moths that are searching for a place to call home and to rear their next generation. But by contrast, he also looked at non-native plants, and here's just 3 of them that he listed. The crepe myrtle can attract 3, which is better than nothing, but heavenly bamboo and sawleaf silkova, it's 0, nothing. And so it doesn't provide any habitat benefit. If you want to read more about this specific chart, you can read Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Talani. Plus, he has a website, Homegrown National Park, where he says, since we need more nature in our urban areas, so if each of us plants native species in our individual gardens, just think of it, how that will knit the wildlands together and start to bridge and create more habitat throughout the region. California Native Plant Society is a great resource for all of this, and they have a website called calscape.org, which I'll show you in a bit, that talks about, helps you find plants native to your region, plus all kinds of information about the natives and what they want, how they live. And then Las Politas is another very well-researched website that's been a good resource for me for a long time. Some people say, well, what is a true native plant? You get to see all these cultivars, and like the California poppy, the bright orange that you see out in the Central Valley and up in the foothills and all over the state. It's our state flower, of course. And it's just when we're having a peak bloom season, it's just amazing. But there are lots of other poppies that have been cultivated, and are they native or are they not? A term that this budburst.org website came up with is nativars, which is a native cultivar. And they've been researching, and they did some studies. They had some citizen science studies last summer, and they'll probably put out some more. And the thing about natives, a true native is open pollinated, and that preserves the genetic diversity. So it's not the same plant over and over again each time, and that'll help plants adapt to different climatic conditions and situations and make them more resilient. So that is important. Cultivars often are plants that are found in the wild, and like, coffee berry, San Bruno Mountain, or Point Reyes baccaris. That's where they found them. Or Point Mulati monkey flower was found at Point Mulati. So those are true natives. But to manage the traits, many of them are grown vegetatively, which is they're cloning them. So it's the same plant, but it is more of a native than one like the rose chiffon poppy that's been cultivated in a lab. Is probably has more genetic diversity than those pink poppies do. So there are some studies that show a decline in some of the cultivars as food or nectar quality or attractiveness, but it's a very small collection at this point of research. And I will mention that some Mediterranean herbs, and there are other plants that are not from this area, are also can be excellent habitat plants. So it's not an absolute situation. So how much of a difference can one person make or one property make? And how many plants do you need? And does it really make a difference? Or am I making this up? So this is a story. I experienced this about three months ago. I got lost. I was driving down Highway 99. You can see it there over on the right, going through Stockton, getting close to the airport. And I was looking for a place to get some food, and I was following my GPS on my phone. And I ended up here in this industrial wasteland of paving and roofs and very few trees, and trying to figure out, well, where do I go next? Or just turn around and go back? And I just happened to look to the right, and I saw the property that I have surrounded by a red box. And as I looked to my right, I saw this. The property was completely surrounded by a 15-foot band of native plants. And there was a bioswale in the middle, so it would capture all the runoff and treat it from the surrounding paving and parking lots. So again, look at how big that area is. So I stopped the car, took my camera, wandered over, and spent some time looking at this beautiful landscape. And it was rich, it was diverse, lots of plants in bloom. There were hummingbirds, there were all kinds of insects, there were butterflies. And what I really enjoyed most were the giant carpenter bees, the big black shiny bees. And they were hovering over the Cleveland sage and just really happy. And it was just a very live and vibrant ecosystem from this little strip around that big property, surrounded in a sea of pavement and roofs. So, and I've seen this happen in a neighborhood, say that's all lawnscapes except for one residential garden that looks like this, full of natives and full of flowering plants. And just a small piece of land like that, they do come, the butterflies, the birds, the lizards, they all find their way there. And so if each of us does that, it can make a huge difference. So now that you're saying, okay, I'll give it a try, I think I'd like to do this. Where do I start? How do I pick plants? You certainly don't want to just get into a book and open it up and look under California natives, because the first thing you want to do is focus on the natives that are regional to where you live or where your property is. So there's two resources here. The one on the right is the Las Politas search by zip code feature. And you type in your zip code, it shows you the different habitats. This one had two, and I chose the California Central Oak Woodland. The map on the lower right shows you the occurrence of that habitat, all those little pink dots. And then it lists some of the dominant plants. I have that surrounded in red. And those are the keystone plants. Those are the ones that you want to start with and start to build your palette. And you can put one tree in, two trees, depending on the size of the tree. You don't need to put every single plant, but you do want some diversity, and you'd like it to be native to the region. And plus you can get so much information. If you click on any of those plant names, pops a wealth of data and recommendations. And then if you go to the calscape.org website, and the picture on the left is from that, I just typed in a random address. I think I just clicked on the map, and up popped a list of, or a selection of 595 plants native to that latitude and longitude, that spot, which is mind-blowing. And they have all these different categories: shrubs, succulents, grasses, sun, shade, butterfly hosts. That's a good one to go to. Annuals. And for each plant, it'll give you a host of information. So these two are a great place to start. And then you can round out your palette depending on, as a designer or a plant aficionado, or my friend calls himself a plant geek, then you can round it out from there. Another thing that you can find on the Calscape website, as you click on a plant, it's actually 2 pages. You have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. But at the very top, I clicked on miniature lupin, and there are lots of pictures. And to the right, this map is really significant. This tells you that this plant is adapted to so many different locations. The yellow is indicating the occurrence in the state. So this plant, it's everywhere, which tells me it can handle drought, it can handle moisture, it can handle different kinds of soils, different kind of microclimates. So I like to pick plants that have a map similar to this one, and not one that shows a little tiny dot somewhere in an obscure part of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And that one's probably more of a risk to put in your garden. These are the categories. They also tell you if it's an easy to grow, where you could find it, all kinds of great information. So now that you know what you want, you need to find nurseries that have the plants you're looking for. And the first thing is make sure you buy organic. And you want to be aware of especially neonics, which are neonicotinoids. And they are a class of synthetic neurotoxic insecticide that is used on ag crops and lawns, gardens, golf courses, flea and tick pet treatments. They're often used in landscape nurseries. And the problem is that they get into the plant, and the neurotoxin, if a bee visits the plant or if a bird visits the plant, they can be exposed to the neurotoxin as well. And there are articles that are concerned that this neonicotinoid issue is one of many reasons that we have bee colony collapse. Also, I've done a lot of restoration projects, and when you're dealing with true nature, restoring a creek bank or restoring a place in Tilden Park, say, it's really important to have the plants be from that specific location. And there are nurseries and biologists that collect the seeds, that's what propagules are. They're whatever you're going to use to propagate the plant. And they will grow them from that. So if you have a project that's a restoration project, there are some nurseries that will do that. You can contract with them. You can also learn how to propagate your own plants from your own garden. And I've also wanted to mention, this is a good place to put it, as you're looking for plants, we are trying to use plants to attract beneficial insects to repel pests, and there are plants that repel pests. And there's a list that you could start with here on this link. Here's the Calscape's availability list for nurseries, and with any individual plant, if you scroll down, it'll tell you this plant is carried by 8 nurseries. This plant is carried by 63 nurseries. This plant is carried by 1 nursery. So that, again, gives you an indication of how available it is and possibly how resilient the plant is. So this is a great place to start, and I would encourage you to go with small local nurseries. You can also get involved with your local California Native Plant Society chapter. Many of them do their own plant sales. And you could learn how to propagate and grow and then help them sell plants to help support the organization. That's a great way to guarantee quality of your plants. Plant lists, there's lots of lists. This one I also showed you in the beneficial insect presentation. And what I like about this is it's a good start. It's from Cornflower Farms, the link's down below. This is a good start for attracting some of the most popular and effective beneficial insects, what major pests they go after, and then what plants attract them. And as you look through the list of plants, you'll see that one plant will attract many insects. Achillea is listed, I think, 4 or 5 times. That's the yarrow. And so I would start, if you wanted to pick some of these plants as you're looking at your list and developing your plant palette, and see what shows up, see what it's attracting. More recommendations for a healthy and diverse habitat include choosing native insectary plants that bloom at different times of the year, include species that attract beneficial insects like this list, or repel insect pests like the list we just discussed. I always go for choosing natives first, but not only natives if you have some favorites that are very effective. And I think it goes without saying, if you're trying to attract beneficial insects, you really need to use organic pest management, because the even low toxicity or bio pesticides can't affect beneficials, and it's just best to not go there at all. And it's a good idea to let some plants go to seed and skip deadheading sometimes, because that'll provide seed. Many plants will reseed themselves. That gives you a healthier population in your garden. Here's a couple of lists that show variable bloom times. Now, the one on the left is from Cornflower Farms and shows a number of native plants that will bloom different times of the year. The one on the right, I would really encourage you to explore the Pollinator Posse website. This list has, and this is just from A to Cosmos. So you can imagine how long that list is when it gets all the way down to zinnias, right? It lists the bloom time and the color. It lists the pollinator. It lists the type of plant. And also on the far right is the use column, where it has nectar, shelter, pollen, and nectar. So you get an idea as you're developing your plant list. You're providing a variety of benefits to your garden and to the beneficials that come visit it. And this is another chart from Cornflower Farms that talks about the wildlife uses. I think I mentioned this earlier. You need plants to provide food, cover, and roosting or nesting sites. So these plants this tells you what some of these plants provide as benefits. And two of them, let's see, the buttonbush, Cephalanthus, and there's one other one if I search quickly. There it is. And Quercus, there you go. There's the oak. They provide everything. So here's a few of my top favorites that I like to encourage people, and you can go back and get the PDF of this and study the list. I started with the same resources I recommended to you, and then looked at plants that are easy to grow, that have grow in a variety of climates, like the chart for the lupin that had the yellow all over the state. They're low water, they're habitat plants. Many of these are keystone plants. So we've got the yarrow and the manzanitas, the coyote bush. There are lots of ceanothus species. I just picked one. The buckwheats, California poppy, and then the grindelia, the gum plant. That's a plant that isn't often used in gardens. It is a keystone species. It is a hyper pollinator, attractor, beneficial insect attractor plant. And I really encourage people to pick up 3. You have to have more than one, right? 3 or 5 is the design philosophy. And put them in your garden, see how they do, and see what comes to visit. I also wanted to mention that the Lupinus arboreus, the golden bush lupin, I'm seeing reports that there's a concern that if it gets out of its habitat, which is on the coast, that it might become invasive. So keep that one where it belongs. And the second more lupins and purple needlegrass, which is the state grass, baby blue eyes. And then here's oregano and thyme are excellent beneficial insect and pollinator plants. Just let some of them go to flower, and then you can also use it in your kitchen. Great plants to have. Thyme is so tough. Definitely encourage people to have some of that. Well, we have it here. We get snow periodically, and it doesn't phase the plant. It just perks it up. And I just wanted to mention that I found a hillside covered with the silver lupin on the right there. It's just the sunlight was shining through it. Very striking. Oh, I noticed rosemary's there too. That's another plant. So some design and maintenance tips. A lot of people are worried, well, if I put a bunch of natives in my plant, my neighbor planted a bunch of natives and now it looks like a weed patch and it's all dry. And well, there are things that you can do to prevent that from happening. First, as a designer, you want to include at least 50% native evergreen. I encourage evergreens as a foundation to your design. Some toyons and baccharis, coffeeberry, there are others. But plants that look good year-round, they also provide benefits, and you create a design structure around them so that as the other plants bloom and then die back and some need to be cut down, some can just be allowed to go to seed. You'll have a structure in your garden and it won't just look like you had a big poppy field that died. You want to maximize the bloom year-round, as we've discussed. Habitat benefits and design interest by adding boulders and water features. Really important to provide places for the lizards and other animals to hide. And you want a variety of heights. You want a layered habitat. I've seen some gardens that somebody went out and picked a number of really nice, pretty plants at a nursery, and they look great, but they all got the same height. And when you spread them out, it just doesn't have the interest it doesn't replicate nature. It doesn't create a spirit to its design. And do plan on annual limited trimming, pruning, shaping of your native plants. Keep them a little bit neater. If they're allowed to go unchecked, yeah, they will get kind of ratty. Most garden plants will. Rather than hedge them, you just go and snip and shape, and that also improves fire safety, but there's more a way for air to blow through the plant and not just a big dense hedge. Some planting tips. Fall is always the best before winter, but winter rains, and you saw that question marks. How do we know when that is? Sometimes it's really hard to predict these days. And this gives it time to get a little established, and before it gets cold in the winter, and then it starts establishing its roots. And cooler nights are less likely to cause pathogens to come in effect if any roots are damaged. Any pathogens in the soil are less likely in the cooler weather to come attack the plant. Spring is second best. Winter is third if the ground is not saturated. And then in the mountains and high desert and other really cold winter locales, fall is just too late. You need to put them in maybe late summer, just as it starts to cool down a bit, again, to get the roots established before the plant has to go dormant in the wintertime. Hole size, the general best management practices, 2 times the width of the can and as deep or just a little less. But and you have to roughen the sides. You don't want to bucket. You want it to be rough so the roots can find their way into the soil. But there are some books and some references and experts that say, no, you don't need to do that. It could be half as deep or it could be less wide, same size and square shape. So do what works for you. And it's a learning process and see where you have the most success. No amendments at all, except the addition of compost if soil is heavily compacted or impacted. You can have your soil tested. In urban settings and heavily compacted soils, or it's been a lawn and it's compacted and who knows what was on the lawn before then, you might want to get your soil tested and tell them you're going to be replacing the garden with natives. And many of the soil labs will make specific recommendations for natives. Native plants do not want nitrogen, especially. So we want to water the plant before removing it from the container. You want to put water in the hole and allow it to drain, so that when you put them together, both of them have been moistened and the roots are able to find their way around. You want to be gentle with the root ball, and you want to be very gently with pulling the roots away. You've seen people going in there kind of right. That's tough. It's hard on the plant. And using gopher baskets is highly recommended unless you're absolutely certain you don't have them. Then backfill and tamp gently, but you don't want to, during the rainy season, you don't want a basin. That's what we've always been taught, to do a basin. And the reason is that a lot of our native plants are susceptible to having water around the stem when it goes into the ground. So let the rain wash over. And in the summer, you could use a basin as long as the plant is up a little bit higher to get the roots established. A rock, this is from Las Politas, and I have noticed that it occurs in nature. But they recommend that you put a rock, it doesn't have to be a big one, on the west side of the plant, on top of the plant's root ball. And what that does is it helps protect that part of the plant from the really hot sun. And as our weather continues to warm up in the summer, that might be a wise thing to do. And I did see it. This is a natural occurrence where a tree sprouted right next to a rock. And I've seen big trees next to big rocks. So it seems to happen. You want to mulch with proper material. Most of the time that would be wood chips, arbor chips, not bark. The bark has this waxy substance that protects the bark, but it doesn't break down when it's used as a mulch to feed the soil. And plants that grow in desert or chaparral environments, you might want to mimic what they have naturally as a ground cover, and sort of a crushed gravel or even some sand. But most of the time I prefer just the wood mulch. Here's some other things. You want to monitor the plant carefully for at least 2 years, water it infrequently, really baby them, really go out there and watch. Don't just, if you have an irrigation system, I know from my own self, I just don't find the time, we're all busy, but go out in the garden. It's good for the soul. Look at the plant, talk to the plant, dig around, see how it's doing, and really give it a good chance the first 2 years to get established. And sometimes native plants take 2 years before they even look like they're going to grow. And that's not abnormal. Sometimes that's the way they are in nature. They sit around and wait until the time's right. You want to train the plant to search for water. And the picture on the lower right is how nature does it. It's the deeper roots dig down, and roots will mine to find water. They will search for water. Charles Darwin called the roots of the plant the brains, and said that they just seek out water. So when you do a lot of shallow watering, those plants are not really going to be trying to find any water. It's just right there. So, and when the roots get down deep, I came across an article that's in the resources list that talks about how the mycorrhizal fungi, the white threads, connect individual plants together, and then they connect to the roots, and plants share nutrients, they share moisture. It's pretty amazing what the forest does. And if you want to look it up, it's the Wood Wide Web. So WOOD WIDE web. I think it's .org. But if you Google that, and you'll read about the scientist who came up with the idea. The top picture is another way that you can indirectly collect water and have the roots go for it. It's a permaculture principle where you grade along the contour and you create these little berms. So imagine when it's raining, the water hits the ground, it starts to run down the slope, and then it gets trapped. And then it'll it'll slowly sink down, and the roots will find that water. So it's a great way to help your trees and larger shrubs. Now, summer moisture, on hot days, moisture can kill the mycorrhizal fungi. associated with the roots, and it also can harm or kill plants. It can actually activate pathogens that would not be activated in a dry summer soil. And that's where you get oak root fungus and other diseases when you've got native plants in a garden that's getting watered on hot days. You want to limit, once they get established, you either avoid or limit the amount of direct irrigation you give them. It should be on the ground level, but not at the crown. And there is one other technique that is used by people who are doing landscaping work in fire-prone communities. There's been a lot of research on this, and it seems to really help. It's called maintaining the live fuel moisture content of your plants. And you use an MP rotator to just lightly spray the garden once or twice a month, just very lightly, like an intermittent summer rain. And we were getting them this year, where it would rain once a month just for a little bit. And what I noticed is that the leaves get hydrated, the plants are less likely to ignite if they're hit by an ember. And that can make a huge difference in protecting your home and your property and add to your arsenal of fire safety techniques. So here we are, a list of resources. Definitely check out your Cash for Grass programs and irrigation and other outdoor upgrades. I've listed a few cities here, and you could also look for rebates within your zip code at the state website, saveourwater.com. And I will mention that there are other resources listed and provided when you go back to the page when you got onto this web presentation, and download those PDFs. And you can get a PDF of a presentation. And then Sacramento Stormwater Quality Partnership, BeRiverFriendly.net, and Our Water, Our World are great references for all things native and organic, plus the UC Master Gardeners in Sacramento, the California Native Plant Society, Las Politas, and Cornflower Farms. And you can see the other videos of this series, plus previous videos from years past, by going to that link, BeRiverFriendly.net. So thank you for watching. I hope you are inspired. I hope you've learned a few things, and come back and see some of the other videos when you get a chance.